You are welcome to the Nigerian World Immigration Embassy.
The administration is expanding its travel ban now. All immigrants from Nigeria will be banned.
Police also stopped me because I was in Nigeria, and then they arrested me, and they even hit me. Next thing he said,
like the fraudster because I'm in Nigeria.
Never seen anything like this.
Operates in the shadows where they arrange tickets and visas for clients.
Claim to pay the government officials and their contacts in these embassies. Sometimes
if you think visa denials are just about security or policies, think again. It's also about the money. We are presenting a case for a region that pays one of the highest visa application fees in the world, only to be rewarded with one of the highest rejection rates. Is this a coincidence? Absolutely no. We're talking about Africa and the money printing machine that the US and Europe are silently running in the region. What you're about to watch will change how you see global travel forever. Just stay with us as we uncover where your money goes, who profits from this scheme, and why you should care. Global immigration poses significant challenges for developed nations, as individuals from developing countries often view these destinations as their ultimate goal. This is particularly concerning for developed nations, as there are approximately 152 developing countries worldwide, with only 37 classified as developed. The disparity in living conditions, economic opportunities, and stability between these regions continues to fuel migration, placing additional pressure on developed countries to manage and respond to the increasing influx of immigrants. When we talk about developing countries, Africa comes to mind because the continent has the highest number of developing countries in the world. Now, does this mean that Africa has the highest number of people trying to leave for these developed nations such as Europe and America? Of course not. When looking at the top applicants for the European short-stay Schengen visa, Asian countries like India, China, and Turkey dominate the list. Only after them do African nations such as Algeria and Morocco appear. However, what places Africa in a bad light is that, despite the fact that its population is significantly smaller than Asia's, the visa rejection rates are the highest globally. This high rejection rate makes the African case especially noteworthy and troubling in discussions around global immigration. Now, why do Africans face the highest denial rates in the world when the continent does not have the highest number of visa applicants? Let us put the fact that Africa has the highest number of developing countries aside, because that is not the answer. Remember when we said that developed countries have a higher stake in the discussion of global immigration? This is because if they do not put their effort into safeguarding their country from immigrants, then their economy will reach a point where it will no longer be able to sustain the massive waves of people who are gaining entrance. A situation that will ultimately result in an economic failure. That is why the toughest kind of US visa to get is the B1/B2 visa, which is a short stay visa and has become hard to get because the US is now plagued by people who are overstaying their short stay visas and evading deportation. These developed countries simply want you to come and go. But this is basically where Africans fail the test. In April 2024, the EU Council decided to impose visa sanctions on Ethiopia on grounds of previous immigrants not being cooperative in returning after visa expiration. In that same month, the US lifted its visa restriction on Gambia, which had been imposed since 2021, after its immigrant return rate increased from 14% in 2022 to 37% in 2023. Also, the US ambassador to Ghana acknowledged that Ghanaians face higher visa rejections partly because they have a high rate of overstaying visas in the US. This was coming after 2016 when Ghana faced a 65.7% denial rate for tourism and business visas, which was one of the highest denial rates in the world at the time. Now, we know the answer to why Africans have the highest visa rejection rates in the world by Europe and the US, but visa overstay is not just the problem. There's a lot more to it. When an international student organization met with the US Department of State to complain about the high visa rejection rates African students were facing, the government agency stated that the country approved or denied visas based on individual merits, but still admitted to the fact that higher visa application rates equally triggered higher rejection rates. But now, let's get a bigger picture. From 2014 to 2022, the total number of Schengen visa applicants from Africa fell from 2.22 million to 2.05 million, a 7.7% decrease. But what is even more shocking is that within the same period, the rejection rate of the same Schengen visa rose dramatically from 18% to 30%, a 12% increase and nearly twice the global average. This means that neither the theory that visa approvals are based on individual merits, nor that visa approvals are determined by the number of applicants explain the position of Africa, and we cannot entirely base the situation of Africa on the low return rates, as there is yet another thing to look at, which is the movement of money. Now let's stop talking about Africa for a moment and look at what Europe and the US have in their cupboards. When we talk about visa denials, we're not just talking about crashed hopes or wasted efforts. We are also talking about millions of dollars lost by Africans to Europe and America through non-refundable visa fees, which an EU Observer journalist called reverse remittances. These reverse remittances are viewed as a way in which developed countries take back the money that flows from their economies to Africa through non-refundable visa fees. And as petty as the business might seem, it has become a multi-million-dollar revenue generation means. Just in 2023 alone, the European Union made 53 million euros only by rejecting visas in Africa. We once said that immigration policies are more or less about the money, and that developed countries have a higher stake to lose in the game. But the tables have turned, and we now see how these developed countries are exploiting the demand for their high price tag in the immigration market. The framework for this exploitation system has always been the thought, why not, while trying to save our economy from immigrants, we make money from them at this time. Thousands of Africans paid the non-refundable visa fees only to be disappointed in the end. A remarkable story is that of Atem Keng, an established writer from Cameroon who had been offered an international literary residency in the US, only to be turned down because the visa officer simply didn't think of him to be an accomplished writer. According to Atem Keng in his narration to the Guardian newspaper, what was even more painful was not that he was rejected, but the fact that the whole thing was done so casually with very simplistic reasons that were not worth enough explanation for the $200 he paid. An even more ridiculous event concerning nonchalant visa denials in Africa happened in 2017, when an African trade summit was held in California without an African in attendance, because all the delegates from Africa were denied visas. It is stories like this that begin to make one wonder if visa assessments are real or just a show that is being put on while shadowy policies make the decisions. Take Japan for instance. Japan is among these developed countries that can be a prime target for immigrants, and Japan knows this. This is why the country is known for having some of the strictest immigration policies in the world. But the difference between Japan and most of these Western countries is that Japan doesn't charge you a visa fee until your visa is approved. And if your visa is denied, Japan's reapplication policy mandates that you wait up to 6 months before you can reapply again. Unlike the European and US policies that allow you to reapply as often as you like, so that more money can be generated from visa application fees. The point here is that Japan is a developed country that is trying to save its economy but is not interested in making money from the process. This cannot be said for Europe and the US, which market themselves as more open to Africans, charge visa fees, and yet allow sentiments to override what is supposed to be an objective assessment of the individual. Instead of addressing this exploitative model, the European Union took it a step further in October 2023, increasing its short-stay visa fee from 80 euros to 90 euros for adults and 40 euros to 45 euros for children. This may not sound like much, but for many Africans and given their purchasing power, the bar has just been set higher. Take Nigeria for example, where the minimum wage is less than 43 euros and inflation is fast climbing at 35%. Many are forced to take loans or gather their life savings just to be able to cover the cost of this visa application that go nowhere. And remember, the costs aren't just about the visa fee. Aspiring African students who want to study abroad also lose out on the non-refundable fees they must have remitted to international universities for admission letters that can no longer grant them visas. Now, you see how the money-making scheme goes beyond just visa fees. Revenues are generated for these schools by African students who never get to materialize their dreams. And it doesn't just end there. When we take a step back, the picture becomes even more devastating. Millions are lost on flight bookings, agency consultations, and hotel reservations that vanish into thin air when visas are rejected. The impact of these visa denials is becoming more than just financial. They also take a psychological toll on those who are affected. On the other hand, it's just more money for America and Europe as more and more Africans keep lining up at their embassies due to the economic situation of Africa. You may call it a payback, a form of recouping the losses generated by Africans who overstay their visa and become a thorn in the flesh of law enforcement agencies. But wrong behavior such as this should be met with visa sanctions that would focus more on regulating entries rather than punishing innocent African travelers. We're not talking about the famous Trump's ban here, which was in itself controversial. Rather, we're talking about better reforms in the UK, Canada, and the US immigration policies towards Africa, starting from the removal of visa fees for denied visa applications and better transparency in what they have for Africans. Western countries are not doing Africans a favor by letting them into their respective countries. These Africans are the ones who cover their travel expenses and every other expense related to their purpose of travel, just like any other traveler. Yet, it is Africans who face high visa fees and higher denial rates, which is screaming, "We don't want you, but we want your money." Leaders of African countries should see this as an important matter to look into and throw their bargaining chips to the table. Or else, Africans are going to lose more than just 53 million euros in the coming years given the increment of visa fees, all for the simple desire to travel like everyone else. Just like we said in the beginning, the subject of immigration is more about where the money goes than about where people go. And the US and Europe are winning this game against an unsuspecting Africa. Either African governments swing into action or wait for these countries to voluntarily give up the money printing machine that they have built on the backs of aspiring African travelers. We for sure know that the latter is never going to happen. That is why it is in the hands of Africans to break down this exploitative system, which can only happen through the support of an intentional domestic government and the compliance of foreign government agencies.